The Countess is a group of men and women whose mission it is to promote and protect the best interests of the women and children of Ireland. This, the Countess points out, was a cherished ideal for the founders of the Irish state, including the organisation's namesake, Countess Markievicz, a minister in the first Dáil and the first female cabinet minister in Europe. Now, the Countess is calling on the Ladies Gaelic Football Association to revise its transgender inclusion policy. The opportunity for the LGFA to revise its current policy is, the Countess is arguing, an opportunity to right a wrong. Sorcha Loughlin is the sports spokeswoman for the Countess Advocacy Group, and she took time to speak to me about all this and what it means for the LGFA Central Council to revise its transgender policy in order to protect women and girls in the sport. Sorcha, thank you for taking time to speak to me.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
The Countess, tell us about this organisation.
Sure. So the Countess is an incorporated organisation. We're single issue and we're apolitical. We're not partisan, and we're not aligned really with any particular political party or group. Our main mission is to highlight the impact of gender ideology on women, children, vulnerable young people, and especially vulnerable LGBT young people. We're not really we're not anti-trans, and we're not aiming to be seen as that. But we do know that most reasonable people out there do agree that there are obvious issues, especially with regard to men being able to identify into any female-only spaces or sport, in my case, and in different areas of life where sex matters. We aim to be able to have conversations in this area. We have working groups in a number of different areas as well, so not just sport, but as I mentioned earlier, looking at LGBT issues. We have issues around schools, and we have people looking at schools and safeguarding, the law, healthcare, sport, and other areas. So we kind of have expertise in quite a few different areas across our organisation.
Inclusion is the key buzzwords of this day and age. Transgender inclusion policy is striking a chord within the Ladies Gaelic Football Association. Tell us about this.
Sure, yeah. Well, it's very easy to frame something as inclusion when in actual fact what it does is it excludes another group. And, they frame this as a transgender inclusion, but really what it is it means that any male can say that he's a woman or a girl and be cleared to play in the Ladies Gaelic football team or club or whatever. And we feel that this is actually exclusionary to some women and girls, and it also is extremely unfair to all of them. This is a sport that was set up to allow women and girls the opportunity to play Gaelic football, and essentially undermining the fundamental basis of the sport by allowing some males into the sport. The policy that they introduced, we analysed it back in February when it came out, and I must say it was very disappointing. It's extremely unscientific. It doesn't give any references for where they got their policy from. It doesn't give very much guidance to clubs or refs or anything like that on how to handle issues that might arise on match day or beforehand. And we feel it needs to be revised or overturned at the earliest possible opportunity.
For those out there who may label you and the Countess as an organisation as hateful, bigoted, selfish, homophobic, and so forth, what do you say to these people?
Well, number one, we actually have a working group looking at the impact of transgender ideology on lesbian, gay, and bisexual people, and a lot of the people in that working group are themselves gay. So, to say, oh, it could be homophobic is really just too simplistic. These policies are not allowing for equality between males and females. They're actually disadvantaging females in many different areas. And my main focus obviously is sport, but that applies across the board where, you say it's inclusive, but in actual fact, what it is it's prioritising the wants of certain groups over the basic rights of sex-based rights for women and girls. Sure, like you could say anybody's bigoted if they don't agree with you, but when you look into what bigotry is, it is the refusal to see somebody else's point of view. And we've actually analysed these issues from a lot of different angles, and come to our conclusion based on research, based on evidence, based on reason, and based on popular opinion. We conducted a poll, a Red C poll, a couple of years ago. We found that the majority of ordinary everyday people agreed with us on, especially on the issue of sport, but on other issues as well. And we would reject any sort of any attacks based on simplistic wording or identity based attacks. It's really this is a deeper issue than just a single belief.
In terms of biological males playing on LGFA teams, speak to us about this evidence.
So, well, initially, in terms of fairness, there are quite a lot of studies done on the effect of testosterone suppression on the competitiveness of males against females. So, some studies done on it would term trans women, indeed, the suppression of testosterone does affect their performance, but not meaningfully when compared to women. So you're essentially allowing an unfair component in. It doesn't negate anything to do with sort of puberty. So men, then it's well documented that males will have a different bone structure, different muscle type, different lung size, different heart size. Their aerodynamic capacity is different, their strength is different, their upper body strength is different, their speed, even the angle of the hips is different. So your skeletal structure, your muscle structure, and your sort of the powerhouse of your body, the lungs and the heart, are all different and essentially stronger in males than females. And none of that is actually affected at all by testosterone. So when you look at the studies that are done on that, it seems to be essentially meaningless. And they've included this metric of 10 nanomoles per liter testosterone limit, which is enormous. It's almost at the normal male range, and it's way above the average female range. So it's difficult to see where they got that from. And the other issue, not only to do with competitiveness, but also to do with safety on the field, is that women are more vulnerable to things like concussion in a collision. And so if you introduce a player that's bigger, stronger, even just they're more dense. So if you have a collision against that male player, you are more at risk again of concussion and other injuries, and that's also documented. So the science would say it's unfair and it's unsafe. One of the major reviews done in this area was done by World Rugby, and they conducted a review over 2 years where they looked at all the science in this area. They heard from many, many different experts. They listened to people who were arguing for the inclusion of males, men who say they're women, and they looked at the science and people who were saying that they shouldn't, and they came down on the side of the science, and they have a female only category now. For World Rugby guidelines say it should be a female only category, and the IRFU have introduced that here. So we have another organisation, that's 32 county organisation. It's a similar sport in that it's very physical, and it has protected the category of female. So you can, when the LGFA said that they looked at the science, it was interesting that they didn't include any of the studies at all in their policy. So we can't obviously analyze what science they used. They haven't released it, but we can look at the science that was done by another body and see that indeed it seems like fairness and competitiveness for women is affected by the inclusion of males into the game, into any games or into any sport. Um, so we were obviously campaigning for this issue and trying to get it out there for people. We love more people to be aware that this policy exists and to have a look at our resources so they can make their minds up about what they think of it.
You use the word evidence, but why are the mainstream media organizations not speaking about the evidence you referred to?
Yeah, it's interesting. We've approached quite a lot of mainstream media with our statements and our press releases, and done our best to engage them. But we generally come up against a brick wall. So I'm not really sure why they're afraid or unwilling to address the issues. But so that's why it's brilliant to get the opportunity to discuss it with yourself here and bring it to people's attention. We shouldn't have to rely on just larger organisations, state-based media, etc. To get our message out there. And so that's why we have, our websites, and we speak to anyone. We've been on regional radio a good bit. We'll speak to journalists. We're more than willing to engage with people who in good faith. Why you don't hear the evidence base? I think there's a lot of activism, around this issue, and it all seems to come from the same sort of side, if you will. It seems to be biased towards, inclusion of transgender ideology in different areas of life, and without really deeply analysing the effect on women. And I think that's basically because of the historic sort of second class citizenship of women, both here in Ireland and internationally. So, our mission then is to raise awareness of these issues and how they affect women, girls, children, vulnerable young people, especially LGBT young people. So, we try our best to get our message out there. Um, and it's starting to pay off. The group have been working really hard since foundation to get our messages out there and to allow for sort of constructive conversations around it. We're not expecting absolutely everyone to agree with us, but we would love to have more opportunities to engage with people in meaningful debate and discussion about the nuances of introducing policies like the one the LGFA introduced. So they kind of bring in this policy, but it's so simplistic. It's obvious that they haven't looked at the effect on their existing players, or that they haven't looked at that whole range of studies that are done in this area. Because if they had, I feel the policy would be composed differently, and the same applies to a lot of sports policies, and indeed a lot of policies in other areas, for example, in prisons or hospitals for same-sex spaces and same-sex care.
We spoke already about how our mainstream media is not covering this, but for whatever reason, the points you're making are not being covered by them. But what about the people on the ground? What about the biological females? What are they saying about having biological males on their teams?
It's really difficult for them to speak out. There's been a few women who've spoken out, and they're extremely unhappy, and they're aware of a lot more behind the scenes who are, they just feel very let down by this policy, and they feel that they're going to be put in an extremely difficult position if it comes to a game against a team that is fielding a male player. And, they're kind of saying, how do you handle it on match day? And it shouldn't be up to individual refs. It shouldn't be up to individual women on teams to say they're not playing, because they put their own standing at risk. Then there's a lot of societal pressure on women not to speak up, but we are aware in the background of an awful lot of women who are extremely unhappy with this. A lot of parents speaking out on social media and contacting us through our email and signing up for our email alerts and stuff like that, who are also extremely concerned and would have used our template letter to contact the LGFA. And we also have heard from officials, volunteers, coaches, referees, etc., who also disagree with this policy. It seems that it wasn't properly debated at Central Council when it was ratified, and so we're asking now that Central Council would go back and review their position on it, and that people would put some measure of pressure on them, because they know that at grassroots level this is extremely unpopular, and it's extremely unfair on the young players coming up, and on the women playing right now.
Biological males in locker rooms is another point. Have you had any feedback from biological females in terms of what they feel, how they feel about having biological males in their locker rooms, in their changing rooms?
So we haven't had any feedback on that, and I would say that the reason why is because there haven't, to our knowledge, been that many players ratified under this. One player is ratified in a specific club, but that club is called Miguel Eric, and it's specifically set up to be inclusive of LGBT people. And so this player was able to join that team, and one assumes that the women in the team don't have a problem with sharing a dressing room. Because they welcomed that player into their team before this policy came into effect. So we're imagining that as it becomes more widespread, and as it's been seen in other sports, that women will object. Indeed, there's swimmers in the US who've stood up and testified in Congress about how uncomfortable they were made to feel in changing rooms. There's also comment from football teams and athletes, across the world. So it is an issue for women and girls across all sports, where it's not only safety on the field and fairness, but there's also issues of privacy and dignity, and that applies especially to disadvantaged women, such as Muslim women, who their religion forbids them to share an intimate space with a male, and yet their needs as a disadvantaged group are overlooked by a lot of these kind of policies as well, and they're further disenfranchised on the basis of their religion as well as their sex. So, you know, we hope it doesn't come to that here, and we will object most strongly on behalf of women who can't speak up if it does.
I understand the Countess sent a letter to Roderick O'Gorman, to our minister, about this whole issue. Tell us, what feedback have you had from him on this topic?
On the sports issue, we haven't had much dealings with Minister O'Gorman. In general, we don't tend to get much feedback from him as an organisation. So we haven't had much success in getting a response from him, but his main mission appears to be to push for these kind of inclusive, air quotes, you can't see me, these kind of inclusive policies seem to be part of, you know, his own personal or political agenda. And so we're obviously trying our best to get in touch with him and trying our best to raise these issues with him, but he doesn't seem to be very receptive to hearing our side of the story.
You tell me, where can people get more information about what we've been chatting about today, and indeed about the Countess as an organisation?
We have a website, thecountess.ie, is very easy to find, and there's an awful lot of resources on there where people can look for their specific area of interest. You can follow us on social media, and you can obviously get in touch with us via email or whatever through the website. We have also got specific resources for contacting the LGFA that you'll find if you look on the website there. And we would encourage any LGFA club members to instruct their secretaries. It's kind of complicated, so they need to instruct their secretaries to pursue the county boards, and the county boards to seek clarity on behalf of their members from their delegates who are attending Central Council. So there doesn't seem to be any communication from the LGFA to outside groups, but members do have a voice. So we have a template for members to contact their clubs and to contact the LGFA. That's there on the website, thecountess.ie, and we have other interesting articles. We have a mailing list that people can sign up to kind of keep on top of this. It's a very rapidly changing area, of course, so to kind of keep on top of the main topics that are coming up in the media and we're campaigning on. And of course, we're very we're very interested to hear from anybody who would like to know more about our organisation.
Sorcha McLaughlin from the Countess, thank you for your time. Thanks for taking time to speak to me today.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.